Chase Sr.'s in the house. Always a fun stream on a Friday. And Dan Graziano, Chase of ESPN, says that Robert Saleh is the favorite in his mind from the people that he's talking to, his sources, that Robert Saleh is the favorite to be the 49ers' next defensive coordinator. Do you think that's going to be a reality, or what stands in between Saleh to the Niners?
I think what stands in between it happening is whether or not he gets a head coaching job. He's going to interview with the Jacksonville Jaguars on Tuesday. Then he's going to interview with the Las Vegas Raiders after that. And those are two organizations that are very interesting from a head coaching search standpoint because they are looking for a new culture builder. For Jacksonville, they're moving off of Doug Peterson, and Robert Saleh has familiarity with that organization because he was a linebackers coach there under Gus Bradley, who he followed. And Gus Bradley, of course, is the originator kind of the Legion of Boom. And the Niners run a lot of elements of that defense, and they've run that scheme for years under Kyle Shanahan. And then Saleh went from there to the Niners, where he was the defensive coordinator under Shanahan from 2017 through 2020. And then he's going to interview with the Las Vegas Raiders, who fired Antonio Pierce. Then they fired general manager Tom Telesco when that wasn't expected to happen. And I think that Tom Brady has had a lot to say alongside Mark Davis in rebuilding that organization, just tearing it down to the studs and saying, look, let's start this new regime. Let's start over. Let's get a new head coach. Let's get a new general manager. And I think there are plenty of reasons why Saleh is getting these head coaching jobs. I think people realize that with the New York Jets, he wasn't really dealt a great or fair shake or hand. He had some of the top performing defenses while he was there throughout his tenure. They could just never get the quarterback position right. And Woody Johnson is one of the worst owners in the sport. Now, if I'm Saleh, I'm not sure if I want to go to Jacksonville because I just went from one rocky ship potentially to another. And I don't know if I want to work alongside Trent Baalke, but the Raiders are interesting. And I don't think they go defense here. I do think ultimately they go offense, but now you get to work maybe with Tom Brady, and you get to have some personnel say. You can rebuild that defense led by Max Crosby, who's one of the top players in the NFL. And so that's what would stand between him becoming the defensive coordinator for the Niners is if he gets a head coaching job. I've been saying for months, even during the season, right after Saleh got fired by the Jets, he is my number one defensive coordinator candidate because I think that the scheme still works with a good DC. I think that he has the ability to develop and maximize players. I think the Niners need a little bit of juice, energy, and leadership on that sideline because Kyle Shanahan really isn't that rah-rah guy, but we saw this team respond well to it with DeMeco Ryans and Robert Saleh. I think that familiarity would get some of the players excited, and I think that he could help turn around this Niners defense, which has gone downhill since DeMeco Ryans left a couple of years ago. And so he could be the head coach of the defense. Kyle Shanahan can be the head coach of the offense, and I kind of like that organizational structure, to be honest.
Yeah, and, Saleh in a lot of ways is perfect because – Shanahan didn't say it, but we know that he likes Chris Kasarik. He likes their wide nine.
Yep.
He doesn't. Does he want a new defensive coordinator? Yeah. He thinks there's better guys out there, but I don't think they want to go and switch their entire scheme. Now, he was asked about switching the scheme, and he's like, well, I thought he said one thing when I first heard it because I was sitting there. I thought he had said, like, hey, I'm open to moving the scheme and this and that. And he kind of did. But when I heard it again, it was more like, hey, look, when other teams do things to us, in other words, like the Niners got 4 of the last 6 games they played, they got 0 sacks.
Yeah.
And when you're not getting home, you have to be able to dial up some exotic blitzes. You got to be able to dial up some pressures.
Yep.
And I just felt like Sorensen was incapable of doing it, uncomfortable doing it.
Yeah.
I heard people suggest that maybe he's not good at it because they don't do it a lot. But to me, it was like a statement from Shanahan that not necessarily that he wants to switch the scheme, but that he wants a coordinator that has more tricks in his bag. If you stonewall, our 4-man rush, where do we go from there? I'm sharing the screen on this one because this is Harrison Glazer covers the Jets. He put this out this week. Robert Saleh before and after he was fired. The Jets were first in yards per play, second in yards per pass attempt, second in opponent yards per game, and fifth in opponents' points per game before Saleh went down. And then after, those numbers fell from first to 10th, second to 26th, second to 15th, and fifth to 28th under Jeff Ulbrich. When you see these numbers, do you say, man, Ulbrich's not the guy, or is it, or do you look at the positive and say, yeah, Saleh most definitely is the guy?
Let me add some numbers on top of that too, because from the time that Saleh got hired up until he got fired, the Jets were first in points per drive, first in EPA per play, and third in success rate. And so going back to your Jeff Ulbrich question, a lot of people are advocates for the Niners hiring him if he's not retained by the Jets and he got a head coaching interview. But the Jets were a disaster, even more of a disaster with Ulbrich as compared to Saleh, who frankly, I thought he did a really good job. And they did a good job of compiling talent. He did a good job of maximizing players. A player like Bryce Huff had a career year last year. He had 10 sacks. He signs with Philadelphia and he gets $34 million in guaranteed money. He did nothing this year. And so I think Saleh was able to bring the best out of players. And I think that the dip and downslide in numbers from when Saleh was there to when he got fired, obviously Ulbrich was the interim head coach and he couldn't be the defensive coordinator that he was prior, and that could impact some of the defensive numbers. But I think the biggest storyline with that, Larry, is I think Saleh had a huge say in the defensive game plan. And his say in the defensive game plan went a long way in the Jets defense being one of the top performing units in the entire National Football League when he was the head coach. And then he gets fired. He's not a part of the game plan any longer. And I imagine he's also play calling, situationally, game management wise. He has his fingerprints on that. And we saw a Jets defense that went from being elite statistically to looking dysfunctional, to having all of these lapses, to being statistically and eye test wise one of the worst defenses in the NFL. And so there are a lot of people out there who are saying the Niners have to change defensive schemes. The wide nine doesn't work any longer. Well, hold on. Jim Schwartz runs a wide nine. Vic Fangio at times runs a wide nine front here and there. Robert Saleh was running the same defensive system. It was working. DeMeco Ryans, the last 2 years as the head coach of the Houston Texans, was running the same system, and those Texans defenses have been really good, especially their front, with creating and generating pressure on the opposing quarterback. And so I think the system can still work. Robert Saleh knows it very well. I think that Saleh would be more creative and more exotic as far as finding ways to generate pressure on the quarterback. This team would be fundamentally better off. They'd be better coached. They could survive better against the run. He could put players in a position to succeed. He would do a better job of maximizing and developing players, which is the sign of a good coach. And for all of those reasons, that's why I would like to bring Saleh back. I don't think San Francisco has to change defensive schemes. Do they need to get better personnel-wise at defensive end, at defensive tackle, and at linebacker? There is no doubt about it. But I think that the best coaches in the NFL are able to extract the most talent out of individuals and a team defensive unit. Look no further than a team like the Philadelphia Eagles, who this year have the number one overall defense in the NFL. Last year, they had arguably the worst defense in the NFL. Couple of personnel changes and players making leaps helped to make that happen. But Vic Fangio also coached his ass off. And so you bring in a better coach in Robert Saleh, you become better as a defense. You address defensive tackle, you address edge. Let's say you bring back Dre Greenlaw. You have a really good, blossoming young secondary. I think this Niners defense can get back on track if they knock those things out of the park this offseason. And they're off to a good start by firing Nick Sorensen. It had to happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that the Sorensen thing wasn't working. Is Robert Saleh a good coach? You know, he wasn't good in New York, that's for sure. I mean, he wasn't good as a head coach in New York. His defense played pretty well, but is he a good? I mean, how would you describe the job that he did in New York? Because I mean, clearly they didn't get it done. I don't know how much of that you want to put on him, as opposed to, you know, others. But how much does Saleh have to answer for the fact that, man, he just didn't get it done as a head coach in New York?
Win-loss wise, he didn't get it done. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to. Are you winning games? Are you making it to the playoffs? Are you making runs at Super Bowls? Are you winning division titles? Are you winning consistently? Obviously, that is the job of a head coach. But look, with Robert Saleh, the Jets knew that when they hired him, his specialty, his side of the ball, was defense. The defense was not the issue throughout his entire New York tenure. The problem was they never got quarterback right. And that was the issue at the start of his regime. Then they go out, they make the splash move for Aaron Rodgers. 4 plays into last year, he tears his Achilles. And then it was a free fall offensively after that. But I will say this, they were still a pretty competitive team going into November, December, even with all of that bad quarterback play. And so even if last year they just had average quarterback play, they were a borderline playoff team. But prior to Aaron Rodgers, Zach Wilson was awful. They never got OC right. That could be on Robert Saleh. They never got quarterback right, and the offense was always bad. But the defense, which was his specialty, was a high-performing unit. And you're not worried about, if he comes to San Francisco, how he would fare as a head coach. You want him to be the head coach of the defense. And what he did with the Niners, what he did on defense with the Jets, I think was an impressive body of work.
There was a report yesterday that the Niners interviewed Deshea Townsend for their defensive coordinator position. He's a former Alabama defensive back who played with the Steelers. He's won a Super Bowl in his career. He had a really good NFL career and is now a coach.
Yeah.
And they also interviewed Robert Saleh, and both of those interviews were done virtually. And the interviews mean that the Niners have satisfied the Rooney Rule, which requires teams to interview at least 2 minority candidates, diverse candidates, either minorities or women, and candidates who don't currently work for the team. So they've satisfied that with the Townsend and the Saleh interviews. That being said, are there any other candidates that outside of Saleh, if it wasn't Saleh, or let's just say Saleh were to get a Raiders job or a Jacksonville job? I don't think he's going to get either, to be honest. But let's just say he's not, because I think it's pretty clear he's their first choice.
Yeah.
If they don't get their first choice, who do you think they pivot to?
Yeah, well, you mentioned Deshea Townsend, and I do want to spend a couple of moments talking about him because I think that's an interesting candidate. And it's so funny, when I threw that name out there, I did a video on it, and I talked about it on my social media pages. People are like, isn't the Lions defense awful? Isn't that Lions secondary one of the worst in the NFL? Come on, you can't be such a casual like that. You have to understand that the Lions have suffered injury after injury after injury on the defensive side of the football. We're talking defensive line, linebackers, cornerbacks, safeties. They have suffered a historic amount of injuries on that side of the ball, yet they've still been a unit that's been able to produce. They've still been one of the top secondaries in the NFL. I thought it was pretty notable how Kyle Shanahan said during Lions week or after Lions week, they've had so many injuries, but that's still one of the top secondaries in the NFL. Did you see what they did with a depleted defense with a handful of players on IR against the Minnesota Vikings? Sam Darnold had been playing great. Kevin O'Connell's one of the top play callers in the NFL. They have a great 1-2 punch at wide receiver with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. Aaron Jones is a really good running back, and the Vikings could not find the end zone. And Aaron Glenn, their defensive coordinator, was calling the plays, but Deshea Townsend was leading the secondary. He's the pass game defensive coordinator and the DB's coach, and they've played really good ball at corner and at safety. And that Aaron Glenn system is gaining some popularity because of what he's been able to do. And there are going to be teams jockeying to hire him to be a head coach. And so he comes from that system, and he's been in the NFL for so long coaching up DBs. He has a really impressive resume. I don't think he's going to be the guy, but there's a reason why Kyle Shanahan noticed what he's been doing, what the Lions have been doing, and he interviewed him. And I think part of these interviews are trying to gather intel for what other teams do on the defensive side of the ball to get some of that information. As for some other defensive coordinator candidates, you're looking at a guy like Jeff Ulbrich or Dennis Allen, Matt Eberflus. I don't think Jim Schwartz is going to get let go by Cleveland because it looks as though Kevin Stefanski is safe. But there are those
Gus Bradley.
Gus Bradley is kind of a classic, like, Legion of Boom guy who was with
Cover
Seattle
3.
under Pete Carroll, went to Jacksonville, took Saleh with them. Those Colts defensive numbers were atrocious. But if the Niners want scheme continuity and they want to run it back with the same system, Gus Bradley runs that system, and now he's free. And so, like, those names right there are the names that are probably the most attractive defensive coordinator candidates who the Niners can choose from. But I think Robert Saleh is, like, far and away the best candidate among those guys.
A lot of people speculated that maybe Saleh and Shanahan didn't get along great because Saleh went to coach for Green Bay, but I don't know. I don't necessarily read that as that, and I don't think there's anything there. I do think that Saleh would be popular with the players
Yep.
and with the fans, which is good.